coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And I'm going to do everything I can to not talk about the US election, but I'm going to just get out of the way. I hope no one asks me any questions about it either. Um, going to get out of the way. A couple things on it. First one is a good piece in Ricochet by Owen Schock. Canada has always been a lackey of the American Empire. That just kind of goes through some of the history of Canada's foreign policy tied to Washington. And the other thing is Elizabeth May, who signed this statement from I think they call themselves the Global Greens, which includes the German Greens, calling on Jill Stein to drop out of the presidential race. So Elizabeth May signed this statement that came out a couple of days ago, which is really stunning on a whole bunch of levels because first of all, why get it? Why even get involved in it? Like, what are you doing? Like, even if you really truly believed, what just I mean, I think Elizabeth May actually is American and originally, so maybe she has a little bit more kind of whatever, but this global green initiative and then if you get into it, like, I mean, even if you genuinely believe, like, how can, like, what standing does Elizabeth May have on this? Like, she runs as like the fifth party. She's the fifth party, for God's sakes, right? Like, you got, talk about splitting votes and all this kind of stuff. It's like even far worse. So, and then you read into like, well, then your options are only Harris or Trump. Like, anyways, it's really embarrassing. Honestly, just genuinely embarrassing. I actually, on a make a bit of a tangent, I ended up on Peter Julian's. Oh yeah, Peter Julian's Twitter page, the NDP. And the reason I got there was because of the whole David Puglisi thing a little while ago. And it was just like so embarrassing. Peter Julian just like tweeting endlessly about the US election. I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Like, what is literally, where are you? Or politician of what country? It's just honestly, I mean, it's going to happen. It has lots of impacts on the world. Obviously, it's, it matters, but it's just it's too much to see some of this taking over of every news, whatever. Anyways, we're done with that. TD Bank, this piece in the Globe and Mail about how TD Bank people should end up in jail for all the corruption stuff in the US, which makes sense to me. Haven't followed all the details very closely, but in this story, I was taken aback by this. It says that TD is one of the top 10 largest lenders in the US with more than 1,100 branches. So Canadian Bank, one of the top 10 lenders in the US, which again goes to this point, which I know, but this is just a different way of like how big Canadian banks are globally, right? I think five in the top 50 of global banks, top 50, top 60, something like that. And obviously huge players in the States. Mining Watch has a tweet about the militarization in Palo Quemado, Ecuador, to facilitate Canadian mining activities. The government of President Daniel Noboa has ordered the militarization of the area of Palo Quemado, Cotopaxi, in order to facilitate the operations of La Plata mining project. Just more stories. Obviously, we've seen lots of these coming out about Canadian mining in Ecuador and ecological damage, human rights, indigenous resistance, and of course, all in this context of pushing this free trade agreement, which includes investor dispute settlement. On the climate front, the New York Times, I think it was, had a piece about how 500,000 have died since 2004 in 10 weather disasters, where they're linking it to climate disturbances. Of course, we're seeing this terrible stuff coming out of this Valencia about these flash floods that just multiple hundreds killed, tons of devastation, and stories about connecting that this is a normal thing this time of year there, but it's just gotten way more drastic, which is tied to the climate change. Melanie Jolie has a piece or a post about she had a meeting Today, I'm honored to meeting with Inuit leaders to discuss our upcoming Arctic foreign policy. As we collaborate, Canada is dedicated to working alongside Inuit communities to ensure their voices and priorities are central to our shared vision for the Arctic's future. Now, of course, that means exactly the opposite of what she said. Basically, Canada is trying to militarize the Arctic, and there has been resistance from Inuit communities, and Canada's, I think, pushing that. I'm not totally up to date on all the details in this, but that's my basic understanding. And obviously, all this takes place in the context of changing weather patterns that make that territory slightly more valuable from an economic standpoint, and probably also from a military standpoint. The Financial Times and others, I think this was the Financial Times headline, was Moscow is withholding vital Arctic climate data, warns NATO. And the New York Times had a similar type story, which was about the basically collaboration on between researchers, like climate change researchers on the permafrost and stuff like that, has all collapsed. And of course, it was initially the NATO countries that instigated this, that said we won't, we can't work with Russian scientists. But I think the Russians have responded in making things more difficult as well, which is precisely what we don't need, right? We need that kind of collaboration to better understand these questions. But what's come out of Russia's invasion, which of course was provoked, uh, is that there's a kind of collapsing of this type of cooperation. And I think this is a broader issue with regards to growing conflicts with China, Middle East, everywhere. The more we go down that path, the less we are able to cooperate to deal with this existential issue of the climate crisis. Or to frame it slightly differently, we've created a new existential crisis in terms of potential of a nuclear war that in fact makes it sensible to downgrade the efforts to focus on the climate crisis, which I think is somewhat some of the dynamic we've seen play out in Europe with regards to NATO and Russia and the climate crisis being kind of downgraded. On the NATO front, a number of developments this week. Canada announced $5 billion for frozen Russian assets that are going to be sent to the Ukrainian government, and Canada was the first country to begin advocating this. This was Freeland, Chrystia Freeland, pushing the plan, which she's gotten, and it's a collaboration, of course, but gotten the G7 to basically get on board for, which is, I think it's about $50 billion in total of Russian assets that are going to be handed over to Ukraine. I think they're framing it as the interest and the profits of the assets they've the 300 billion or so they've seized. But I think it's realistically it's a process of basically taking all these Russian assets, which of course makes a peace agreement even harder, right? Because that could be one of the points of leverage to say, hey, if you come to some sort of agreement between Moscow with Kyiv, we will give you back your assets, and the more you move away from that lessens that incentive from Moscow's perspective. I reported this last week. At that point, it was just the RT reporting it, but a Canadian was killed in Russia alongside three others, including a U.S. and I believe two Polish, four foreign on some sort of operation gone awry, and that was on the front page of the Globe. They confirmed that with they didn't give the names, but they confirmed that. And in that Globe story, this has been at least 12 Canadians that have been killed in fighting in Ukraine, or I guess in this case in Russia, but fighting with Ukraine over the past 2 or so years. the Trudeau government organized this big conference in Montreal on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, maybe it was. Can't remember now, on Ukraine. And I found out I wasn't really paying attention much to this, and I found out a very kind of backwards way that, in fact, the Ukrainian foreign minister was here, and foreign ministers from a bunch of countries for this Ukraine peace summit, as they frame it, conference. And the way I found out about it was actually totally bizarre. So I go to drop my son off at 8 a.m. at school, and I bike over to go work on Saint Denis Street. And I do my usual routine, work for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and a cafe. And then I go over to the Bibliothèque Nationale, and I walk through the same pathway I do basically every day. And I walk into the National Library, and there's all this kind of commotion. There's all these people around this room. And there's been a press conference there. It's the Bibliothèque, the Banque, it's Quebec, National Archives of Quebec. So it's usually a Quebec kind of oriented thing. There's a Quebec minister 6 months ago, 8 months ago. I questioned her. And so I see there's something going on. I go read my papers, come back about 40 minutes later, and it's like now it's really heavy duty. They won't let me use the washroom that's right there. And so now I know it's like, something serious going on. At this point, I think it's all Quebec ministers or I think it's a Quebec. I think maybe it's like a Quebec minister, or I think maybe it's Legault, the premier of Quebec. And I go outside. I'm kind of forced outside I go and try to see this room from the outside where this thing's happening. And I see there's these RCMP vehicles, but they have Ontario plates. So at this point, I know it's not Quebec thing. And now I assume it's a like federal minister that's there. And then as I walk around to this room that's where it's happening. The blinds are down. There's this guy that like clearly a security agent of some sort standing outside. He's got a Ukrainian pin on. He's like Ukrainian Canada pin. I go up to the guy in French. I say, what's going on here? It doesn't say I don't speak French. Say it in English. And then he said, I don't speak English either. And so I try to like look under the blinds to see what's actually going on inside. And then all like this guy gets like totally takes my phone, gets aggressive. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, three RCMP agents like descend on me. At this point, I have no idea. I mean, I've now figured out it's probably Ukraine related because the guy's got a Ukrainian pin on, but I really didn't know what was going on at all. And the RCMP guys, one of them I recognize well. They all, of course, know who I am. And they're the one of the two of them are really aggressive and they're claiming like I hit the window and I've assaulted the agent and all this stuff that's just like totally absurd, right? He even says like he's concerned the window has been broken. I didn't even touch the window, of course. And so it's just like really, and then later on, so then they bring the security of the whole like the bibliothèque like kind of on me. And when I go back into the library to read, at this point, I still don't know what's going on. I go something to the desk. He tells me it's the Ukrainian ambassador, and there's a cultural exchange. Somebody I like, I see regularly that works at the library. He says it's a cultural exchange, and it's only later on that RCMP officer actually let slip in this conversation that in fact it was the Ukrainian foreign minister, which I kind of said to this RCMP agency, if you just would have told me this, that there's like no Canadian official. I'm not gonna like, what am I gonna say to the Ukrainian foreign minister? I don't really have a like, it's not, it's, like, okay, I don't like the Ukrainian foreign minister, but it's not really my place. And, it's a country being attacked and, whatever, right? There's like a lot to, so it was, the RCMP made a huge thing out of nothing, but they get really, really touchy on when there's international delegations. Fascinating to see that. The only time I got charged, right? I got a whole court thing was the US ambassador. And they just get totally, I think it's because it could become like a diplomatic incident. Anyways, so there's this whole Ukrainian conference, which is obviously not happening at the Quebec Library. It's happening a different place. That begins later on in that day. It's basically the Canadian government. Joly was there, Trudeau was there. They were hyping up, in terms of media standpoint, they're hyping up the Ukrainian children. As Joly put it, we will have to bring the 20,000 Ukrainian children home. And she's announced new sanctions against Russia, with the U.S. that are specifically related to the Ukrainian children. Now, this whole Ukrainian children, I've always found this one. I know it's like in the ICC's genocide uh, warrant against Putin, that it's actually, I think, quite central to it all. I've never really kind of got this. I mean, I get it at one level. Obviously, if you just start snatching kids from an ethnic group, that can become part of that's part of process of genocide. But in this case, like if you look at it, most of the Ukrainians that fled, or the biggest number, I believe, still are in Russia, of course, right? Like there's huge familial connections. The notion of like Russia like genociding Ukrainian children from the east of Ukraine is just like it's just disconnected from the like linguistic and cultural and whatever kind of like associations between these two people. And of course, like Melanie Joly going on about 20,000 Ukrainian children that are in Russia. And I don't know if this is the correct number, if this is inflated, but like there's more than 20,000 Palestinian children that have been killed, like directly, let alone like indirectly. And it's just it just it seems so transparently kind of like out of place now even more so. I always thought it was a kind of weird angle that they really hype up, but clearly they think this is successful from a kind of demonized Russia perspective. And I know the Russians have their whole like explanation for like what children are there and why they're there and all this and that. And I believe the Russians have even like they have sent children back if there's the proper this and that and this and I'm not like I don't say this as someone who just like believes that Russia doesn't have repressive elements to the government or to the political system, right? I believe that, but I just don't believe that this is like this is not actually an example of a particularly bad thing that Russia's doing in Ukraine. That's at least my sense of things, and it's fascinating to see how much the Canadian government seems to be hyping this whole area. There's a whole bunch of stories all over, front page New York Times, many places about how basically the front line they're collapsing. The Ukrainian military is kind of collapsing. As I think this was the New York Times headline, pace of Russian territorial gains in the Donbass region has accelerated. The business of a stalemate is not correct. They're making steady gains, and that's now understood by kind of everyone. One analyst I saw was he's saying that the whole North Korean troops thing is really principally a way to sort of distract from attention from how difficult Ukrainian military position is and the gains that Russia's making. I don't know if that's true, but that has a certain sense to it, and that's why we're hearing so much about this North Korean angle. Um, on a similar but slightly different note, so Justin Ling published this big long piece about his opinion about the David Puglisi allegations of him being a KGB agent, which of course nothing has come forward, none of these documents, none of this proof, no repeating it when he doesn't have the protection from Chris Alexander. And so Justin Ling publishes this piece where he sort of did this like he says, Puglisi has proved himself to be a willing customer for Russian disinformation who hasn't appropriately disclosed his relationship with the Russian embassy. But then he says it's probably false that he's been paid by Russia. So this is the disinformation expert. This is he was part of the parliamentary group where Chris Alexander, he was one of the people presenting, where Chris Alexander made these allegations about Puglisi. And it's all like, I mean, he's claiming that Puglisi reporting on Freeland's grandfather, that was the Russian embassy that gave that information to Puglisi. And his basis for that is he says a contact of his at the Russian embassy was trying to push the story to him. But he also, while saying this, he admits, and he decided he didn't want to report on this, though clearly, clearly he should have reported on it. that would have been you could say that you got the documents or that you were told of the documents that are in the archives in Alberta or were that you got it from a contact or an individual at the Russian embassy is the one that told you about it. That's I mean that's fine. But to drop this to not report on this when this has been brought forward to you, that's journalistic malpractice on Justin Ling's standpoint. But he's boasting about this, really. He's essentially, but so he even, but in his story, he even admits that actually it was reported on, and maybe it was the Russian embassy that gave this, that pointed these people in the direction. It was reported on by some Communist Party people in Alberta. I don't know, where who got access to these documents. It was by chance, the Russian embassy. I don't know where this whole process came from. But the point being here that when Puglisi reported on it, it was already out there in left circles. So the idea that it was even the Russian embassy that put him on it is not that likely. And even if it was right, like I mean, if you know anything about how things appear in newspapers, like come on, right? Like embassies and lobby groups, and I mean everyone's that's what you're doing. So much of what is going on in the media, and so much of what these different organizations do. Anyways, but so yeah, that's just an example of how extreme this kind of anti-Russian disinformation kind of framing of stuff is. The New National Post had a big front page piece in defense of the warrior culture, and of course, we're going to get more and more of that in the next week or so, in lead up to Remembrance Day. This week there was, I think, really the biggest news, but it really didn't get much attention. The biggest news, one of the biggest pieces of news, is that the parliamentary budget officer is saying that Canada has to spend $41 billion a year more on military to reach the NATO target of 2% of GDP. And in the PBO's thing, they say that this year's budget is 41 billion. So that's already up from 20 billion in 2014. So basically during the Liberals' time, it's been doubled, and now it's got to be doubled again by 2032 to hit this 2% target that the Liberals committed to in July. And the story here, I mean, there's lots of elements to the story. First of all, it's like, I mean, as if this is our biggest security threat, as if more and more people unhoused, climate disturbances, as if more money for the war machine is really dealing with security issues. Okay, but then it's the lack of response. There's no response. There's no response. The NDP doesn't respond. The Green Party. There's no criticism. It's stunning. This huge outlay on the military. I mean, I don't know if these numbers are correct, but at 400,000 a piece, you could build 100,000 housing units a year over a decade, or a bit over, yeah, over a decade, 1 million housing units just for this increase in military spending. 1 million housing units would be like 7 or 8% probably the whole country, housing for 7 or 8% of the whole country. Instead of this increase. I mean, 41 billion is already too much, right? Far too much. So it's just remarkable. The accepted militarism, the accepted, oh, well, NATO said it, so we have to do it, and we're going to just do it. And there's going to be almost no criticism of it. Remarkable stuff. I did a interview with Tamara Lawrence where we broke down some of this stuff and about the Ukrainian summit, NATO Ukrainian summit, and the summit she was at, and this upcoming NATO summit in Montreal on the 22nd to the 25th. And there's a counter summit happening. And I was on Saturday, I went to Cégep de Montréal, which is about like 6 blocks here. It's a well known, one of the more like left wing, most active student unions historically in all the student strikes. And they have a table of literature table by the student union when you kind of pretty early when you walk in. Well, first of all, I walk right in. Well, when I walk in, there's a poster, bloquons l'OTAN, so block NATO. That's like the first poster when you walk into the CEGEP. And it was different. So there was a demo planned on the Saturday, which is the Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix, which I was aware of. And this poster, I'm like, bloquons, is different image than what's on the Mouvement Québécois demonstration. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And it's actually they have a demo on the Friday night, and it's the CLAC, the Convergence des luttes anticapitalistes, which was a big group back in the Quebec City protests back in 2001, the anti-free trade area of the Americas protests, and uh, and so CLAC is organizing. So they have poster, they have on the literature table of the student union, they had stickers, bloquons l'OTAN, and they had actually a whole 16-page English-French a newspaper all about NATO and mobilizing against this NATO parliamentary summit happening here in 3 weeks. So I didn't know any of this. I didn't know. So it's kind of like a little bit of it's negative because it would, I think, probably be better to have the CLAC and the Mouvement Québécois demo together. I don't know the background of why they didn't. I assume one's more anarchisty and one's more Communist Party. Um, but just the fact that they're mobilizing around this NATO summit, which in other instances it may have just passed with nothing, right? There may have been just a NATO summit and there was no counter protest at all. And now we have a situation where we have a Friday night demo, Saturday, and then a Sunday counter summit. I don't expect these to be big demos. Like if these demos got 150 people, I would consider that basically a sort of success. But nonetheless, just that there is this mobilization, I think, is a good sign, and that we're going to it's on the path to politicizing the summit in which I think is obviously a very good thing. Um, on the Palestine front, I published a piece, Bad for India to Kill Terrorists Abroad, but Not Israel, where I may have talked about this last week, I don't think so, but where I kind of delve into the logic that Trudeau puts forward on the assassination of Nasrallah and the leader of Hamas, Sinwar, and versus the criticism of India assassinating Hardeep Nijjar, which of course India considers called him terrorist, and so it's okay for Israel to assassinate those it considers terrorists abroad, but it's not okay for India to do that against the people they label terrorists. I think in both cases this shouldn't be happening. But but according to Trudeau's logic, India had the right to do that, and just kind of pointing out of course, the double standard and the terrorist list, where everything's going on this terrorist list. And I point out, as in the article, that this pattern of following Israel, UNRWA's get labeled a terrorist organization, but if you look at the pattern with Samidoun, it's likely that after 3 years after Israel labeled Samidoun a terrorist organization, then Canada follows suit. So it wouldn't be a total shock if some variation that happened with UNRWA in a couple of years from now, after Israel did that, of course. One thing I wanted to talk about, because I did an interview with Shane Martinez that got lots of traction on the Sarel case, which is happening on Thursday, which is this group that brings Canadians and others, but there's a Canadian branch, to volunteer on Israeli military bases. And in the interview, Shane highlights the notion of the legal exceptionalism for Israel. And I'll be more specific here, the legal exceptionalism for supporters of the Israeli military in Canada. And it got me kind of thinking, I think it's worth kind of like unpackaging some of this. And so basically, Shane's he talks about the case,
how he got so the RCMP doesn't want to prosecute Sarel for violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act, and it's not they're not bringing people to become soldiers in the Israeli military. They're getting people to work on Israeli military bases and to basically take over tasks that the Israeli military would have been doing otherwise. But according to the Foreign Enlistment Act, they use the word engagement, and so the case is focused on Sarel's role in engagement with the Israeli military, and and so there's there are also groups, and the Canadian officials won't uh, prosecute that are violating the Foreign Enlistment Act in terms of bringing them to fight in the Israeli military. That is something that we brought up 4 years ago in a whole big campaign and public letter, and actually got it onto the front page of Le Devoir. And the Justice Minister just like threw it out, saying no, nothing to do with us. This is the RCMP. And then the RCMP just no, whatever. We won't deal with it. So it's not that element. It's this other, slightly more kind of I don't know, a part of the Foreign Enlistment Act, an element of it. So you have fighting in Israeli military, you have assisting the Israeli military, the Sarel volunteer program, and they refuse. And so basically, what Shane got was he got a justice of the peace to agree to hear the case, that it warranted to be moved forward. So he presents the evidence. Justice of the peace says yes, this warrants to be forward, and then the Crown basically takes over the case and then drops it and just basically says no. And so now now the legal, I don't fully understand all these legal steps, of course, but now on Thursday he's going to this other avenue to have the evidence heard to get the case back on track. And so they're gonna have this case to basically get it back on track. And this is a pretty extreme kind of government intervention, saying, oh yeah, we take the case on uh, after the Justice of Peace agrees that it deserves to move forward, and then you just drop it. It's pretty audacious move on their part, but it fits within this whole parameters of joining the Israeli military, assisting the Israeli military in contravention to Canadian law is allowed. And of course, the other big element in all this is with regards to the charities that are supporting uh, explicitly clear in Canada Revenue Agency rules around not supporting foreign militaries. And yet there's the Hessek Foundation, that's its raison d'etre, is 20 years, its raison d'etre is to support another country's military. And there are a number of other organizations that are heavily engaged in that as well. But then if you go even further with that in terms of this exceptionalism, is also the fact that there's just no willingness to apply the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act to all these Canadians who are fighting, right? And there's Canadians coming back, in recent weeks and months from fighting, killing in Gaza, of course, Lebanon, and there's just a total unwillingness to even mention it by government officials. Somebody emailed me highlighting the element of the costs on Canada's healthcare system, or likely costs of these Israeli soldiers who almost certainly were engaged in all kinds of horrible things, and there's probably going to be all kinds of like PTSD and other kind of and so basically making the point that, which I think is a correct one, that there's very likely going to be costs to Canadian society from having these Canadians go and fight in Gaza, and yet so there's a total unwillingness to deal with the war crimes, Canada's legislation on that front, all within the context of this legal exceptionalism that Israel is granted. And I think it's important to sort of tease out the different aspects to this, because there are many different aspects to it, and it just kind of reinforces how complicit we are in Israel's criminal activities in Gaza and elsewhere. On the repressive front, a judge ordered the ISPs of the websites for the Indigo Kills Kids campaign, more judgment against those sites to be taken down. I think they're saying for 2 years, was it? Yeah, at least 2 years. So Indigo's got us further success on that front. The Canada Files has a interview with labor activist Tynan Liebert, facing a couple charges for assault due to Palestine stuff, trumped up charges. The Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, one post saying that they talks by L. Jones and who's a prof at St. Mary's, and Larry Haven, who was I might get these universities wrong here. I get them confused always in Halifax. But Larry Haven, who was a prof at St. Mary's or Dalhousie, I forget, from Independent Jewish Voices, they canceled this talk, and apparently this NASCAD, the College of Art and Design, has deplatformed a whole bunch of Arab and Palestinian academics on safety, security. This is a pattern happening all across the country, of course. There was this Palestine conference on Friday and Saturday here in Montreal, and there was a bit of a kerfuffle. Charlotte Cates from Sammy Dune was on the panel, which I was on, and Dimitri and I'm blanking on her name, Langara prof that got fired and then got her job back. Um, Forgetting her name right now. And there was a big push to get this shut down. I think they didn't announce Charlotte's participation. I didn't actually know Charlotte's participation until the panel happened. This is totally hilarious. I wasn't allowed to participate. I was only allowed to participate by Zoom. So the Centre Saint-Pierre, which is this sort of like kind of, I don't know, left Catholic community center kind of space. They apparently objected. Apparently, I was the only person they objected to in the whole list of speakers. And then they basically, the organizers negotiated some sort of like agreement that I could participate by Zoom. I couldn't physically go there. It's like 6 or 7 blocks from where I live. So, and I've been there like I don't know, dozen, 2 dozen, I don't know, many times. And so the idea that like I was like a physical danger, but it is a little bit unclear exactly why they were hostile to me. But the apparently the person told the Palestine organizers that the head was like didn't was angry at me, and the one avenue is that in March, Stephen Guilbeault, environment minister, did an event there, did a press event there, and I went to the thing and I challenged him. I was actually very this was actually example. I was very respectful. Tried to just ask him a question. It was long, complicated. People can check it out, and it was. I think it was an announcement that was tied to funding because they got $8 million. The Saint Saint Pierre then got $8 million from the Liberals, and Guilbeault announces it actually a little bit later. So I'm not exactly clear on the timeline here, but so that I think they may have been angry at me for doing that. I don't know who the head of. I couldn't tell you. If I bumped into him, I wouldn't know who the head of this group is. So I don't know. I don't like how it was told to me. It was like he was angry at me for something I did, but I don't know who this person is. Um, and so but I find that like quite fascinating to think that like all the different places that I've challenged different ministers, it's the left wing place that would have some bring in some policy of because you did this to Guilbeault at our event at our venue, therefore we don't want you to participate in anything here. Like as if imagine if all the hotels in Montreal that I've like challenged the minister at sort of saying, well, okay, Eve can't, Eve's not allowed to book a room, not allowed to stay at our hotel or whatever, right? Or the universities or whatever, right? And so that I think is a little bit interesting. Now, the other part, this may have not much to do with Guilbeault incident, but might have more to do something historically because in April of 2023, the I forget who organized it. I think Laurel's group, I'm totally blanking on the Peace Group's name here in Montreal. They organized the Ukraine thing, and the Saint Saint Pierre shut that down. And they cited me. It was me and a prof from University of Montreal, and somebody else maybe. And they canceled the booking, and they cited me for that. I don't actually know like I don't know if they cited me as like a Russianist or a Putinist or I don't know if maybe this all goes back to like Haiti solidarity stuff and the NGOs, all the Haiti NGOs. That's a possibility. Like, criticizing these like left Quebec NGOs for their role in the Haiti coup in 2004. I don't really know. Anyways, it was all pretty bizarre to get told by these Palestine organizers that I had been cited as Eve can't come into our space because I don't know, Eve's a danger, whatever the claim was. Now, the pushback on this conference did have a success. The conference went ahead, um, but Francesca Albanese, who was supposed to be the keynote, she ended up pulling out because the Israel lobby started saying that Albanese is speaking at a conference, even though it was not on the same panel, it was a different day, that Charlotte Cates is speaking at. And now Charlotte Cates, because the Canadian government pulled the switch, was part of this terrorist organization, and therefore, right, it's that guilt by association. And now Albanese, who doesn't know anything about Charlotte Cates, probably doesn't really know anything about Sammy Dune, and now she has to pull out because she's getting this heat saying that, well, this was a terrorist organization. And it just shows how the power of the listing process in terms of like criminalizing Palestine solidarity and marginalizing, quite frankly, Palestine solidarity. Now, on the Albanese front, it's a remarkable campaign. I mean, this is remarkable to see this out. Front page of Thursday's National Post is calls mount for ban on UN official. So CIJA comes out saying that basically Albanese should have her diplomatic immunity withdrawn so that she can be pursued while she's in Canada, like as if she's like a terrorist or it's just totally bananas where they've gone with all this stuff. They just so huge attacks against her speaking, and it's going on right now. Now today, they um, the that Neil Oberman, who's running against Housefather for the Conservatives in the West in Montreal, in Hampstead and Côte Saint Luc, the heavily Jewish area of Montreal. Um, Oberman, who's like Housefather is a pro-Palestinian a sellout, or at least the liberals are pro-Palestinian sellout. That's his perspective. He sued. He announced a suit against McGill on behalf of 21 students from Chabad McGill, Hillel McGill, the Jewish Student Laws Association McGill, Israel on Campus McGill, and other organizations, demanding that McGill stop Miss Albanese from promoting hatred on campus and, quote, restrict Miss Albanese from using McGill premises to spread hate speech. All calls on her to refrain from coming to the university university campus to spread any offensive, hateful, or discriminatory language or messages. So they threaten this suit against McGill for having this is a UN special rapporteur who's booked to speak at the moot court, the law building's main theater, and so they threatened this whole lawsuit. And so I just saw on Twitter a few hours ago the McGill administration comes down with like all kinds of bananas stuff, security this, security that. We're going to move the location, all the bureaucratic whatever. And essentially, my understanding is after all this kerfuffle, they offer like a different, smaller room, but in fact they say it's all about security, but then it's a room and what would be effectively kind of potentially more, not that it's going to danger anywhere, but potentially more dangerous kind of situation. Anyways, they end up having to just to like get their own room, get a different room, and they essentially McGill cancels the room for a UN special rapporteur amidst a Holocaust in Gaza. It's absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. The authoritarian, the power of the Israel lobby to basically try to just clamp down on the most basics of academic freedom, of open inquiry. Again, amidst this endless, endless, endless horrors that Israel's committing, principally in Gaza, but obviously in Lebanon, and even elsewhere. Um, so today, the Globe and Mail has a there's an ad in the paper about discussion. The head of the Globe and Mail, I hopefully it happened. I don't know. I sent a few people in Toronto suggesting they go to this event as the editor in chief or the anyway the top whatever the position is, the top person in the Globe was there. It's about moral courage uh, in conversation with investigative journalism. And so they had people from four different places. They had Myanmar, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, and I forget the fourth. But of course, there's a place that they don't have anybody from where there's been 150 reporters killed in the past year, right? And today is the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. And so in the Hill Times thing this morning, they announced that Elizabeth May will be appearing at an event hosted by a charity, the Fahim Dasti Foundation, that celebrates the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. And I don't doubt at all that there's crimes against journalists in Afghanistan, and that the Taliban is not exactly the most respectful of journalistic independence. But come on, come on. How Elizabeth May, how could you participate in an event on end impunity crimes against journalists amidst 150 or whatever the exact number is of journalists killed in Gaza by Israel over the past year? It's just too much. It's too much to see this. They're all like they all go along with it. It's bananas. It's just crazy to see this stuff play out. I mean, the Gaza stuff, Palestine stuff, has just completely thrown the like how can you possibly claim any of their the 20,000 kidnapped or the 20,000 children, Ukrainian children that are being like taken care of in Russian families' houses, right? Like, oh, we're the horrors of that versus the 20,000 killed. And I mean, it's just all of it is just too much to see. The double standards, the hypocrisy is just remarkable. On the media front, CJPME is reporting that the Canada's the Ethics Council, which is of course a totally run by the main media outlets, they refused they backed up, didn't violate the journalistic standards, a National Post piece that said that protests at McGill were, quote, Crystal Knock themed rally, a Crystal Knock themed rally. Yeah, right. That didn't violate the standards of this pro corporate media journalistic ethics group. There was a protest yesterday at the CBC office. Looked at pretty couple hundred people around Palestine journalists killed and the lack of solidarity with journalists in Palestine from the CBC. CJPME had a positive email today that listed a whole series of victories that their media accountability project has had in recent days or weeks. They go through a whole bunch of it, which is it's a good initiative. It's kind of a bit of a response to Honest Reporting Canada. They don't, of course, CJPMEs doesn't have a charitable status, but Honest Reporting Canada does, and that's just one of these genocide, Holocaust promoting groups in Canada that have charitable status, and one that is come light. And there's just been a recent formal complaint sent to the Canada Revenue Agency is Magen Haret Canada. Okay, so it got a bit of attention in recent weeks, specifically after the U of T, right at the start of the year. There's a Palestine demo at University of Toronto, and they were one of the groups, these vigilante Zionist groups that sent basically like thugs down to intimidate students. Well, it's a charity. It's a registered charity. It's directly connected to the Haaretz party in Israel, which is part of Likud, Netanyahu's party, and its roots are with the Irgun, the pre-Israeli state terror forced against the British, and it's a registered charity, and so they announced that they're fundraising for equipment, gear for these kind of like um, vigilante militia types. It's also got this association with this group, this private company called J-Force, which is a Israel focused security company. So for Israel, pro-Israel events, dignitaries, whatever, and that in of itself. So there's really close ties between the Magen Heret and this J Force, and of course, a that's a big red flag, right? Because you can't be getting subsidized donations and then working closely with a private working closely with a private security company because that's profits, passing profits, subsidized, and then passing the profits over, whatever. And so, anyways, we'll see if the CRA moves quickly enough. But it just speaks to how out of control this whole sector is, right? All these charities, this charitable sector, and it's 362 million according to that Bloomberg in 2022 that Canadian charities sent to Israel. But by my estimate, it's got to be $1 billion here. If you take all the different Israel lobby groups, now there's varying degrees to which their raison d'être is lobbying for Israel, of course. The Jewish federations, the schools, it goes on and on and on, hundreds and hundreds of groups. But the synagogues, right? And or the Jewish Community Center in Ottawa, where they hosted the Sarel a few weeks ago, the Jewish Community Center in Ottawa hosts Sarel's volunteer promotion event. Well, that's a registered charity. How do you get it? Anyways, teasing all this stuff out is a bit complicated, but I would venture to guess it's almost certainly $1 billion that's raised by registered charities, Jewish organizations that are Zionist. Some of them, maybe it's only a couple percent of what they do is promoting Israel. Some of them, it's more like, CIJA, where it's basically what they do. CIJA gets its money from the federation, so it's not a charity itself, but it's, as far as I understand, it's getting its, there's tax receipts for the money going to CIJA. Anyways, this whole sector is absolutely out of control. And when you get into it, it's just totally fascinating. So the National Post has this ad for a fundraiser for Canadian Share Zedin Hospital Foundation. So this is Israeli hospital foundation. And the headline is Saving Lives, Delivering Lives. That's for this foundation. Okay, now this event that they're hosting in Montreal, I believe in Toronto, says featuring two distinguished guests. Prof. Ofer Marin, Director General of Shaare Zedek Medical Center, and Glenn Cohen, renowned Mossad psychologist and hostage negotiator. So the hospital foundation, the Canadian charity raising money for Israeli Hospital Foundation, right there is Mossad, right? This is so when you get into these charities, they're all tied to the Israeli military, the university charities, the hospital charity. It's all Israel's such a militarist, belligerent place that it's what's seemingly the most benign or even kind of benevolent-y kind of charity in one way or another is tied into the Israeli military and is tied into stealing Palestinian land, et cetera, et cetera. I thought this was this ad in the National Post was a really clear example of that, where they got Mossad, right? Listen to the Mossad guy. We're going to raise money for a hospital, but it's going to be all about great Mossad and the whatever kind of dynamic. It's pretty remarkable. This student or former student named Shoshana Schwelbel on Twitter, she posts, meanwhile, my Zionist high school in Toronto literally brought in IDF recruiters multiple times a year to incentivize us to join as teams. So not only was our education largely centered around dehumanizing Palestinians, it actively worked to have us kill them upon graduation. And that's, of course, what goes on at a whole bunch of these registered charities. They're all registered charities. They're all being subsidized. A lot of them getting federal direct grants and beyond the subsidy by donation of these different schools. They're telling these kids to go to join the Israeli military, promoting the Israeli military. It's really remarkable to see and to get a whole grasp on it. And I think we need some framing. I was talking to Karen Rodman about this. We need to kind of like get a grasp on the whole big picture and get people's like kind of head around the I don't know what the wording should be, but like sort of the genocidal promotion pipeline, the registered charity genocide promoting pipeline. It's got to be a bit catchier than that. But it really is a remarkable amount of money, and it's a remarkable number of organizations, and it is the most important Canadian contribution to Palestinian dispossession. Now, I've gone on too long again. I'm going to just touch on the NDP's reaction. So the handbook, the IHRA handbook came down with Deborah Lyons, the Holocaust promoting Holocaust envoy. Um, uh, she came down. This Heritage Canada published this handbook. I haven't read it. I can't say I have yet. I may read it. I read a number of people whose comments on it. Apparently, it's like 150 plus. One, I think, is 166 times they mention Israel, and only twice do they mention like white supremacy or white nationalism. So they make it pretty clear that the anti-Semitism they're concerned with is not the white supremacist version, but is the opponents of genocide version. And apparently, at one point, it says that it's a misconception that the IHRA definition silences criticism of Israel. And then the next page, it says that this misconception itself is anti-Semitic, because I guess it's saying that it's because of pro-Israel Jewish organizations lobbying. Um, uh, I think is the logic here. Um, as one person pointed out, this is a successful foreign influence campaign to redefine racism as opposition to ethno-nationalism. Opposition to apartheid is racism. Opposition to genocide is racism. That's what the handbook does quite clearly. Now and what the IHRA whole thing's been about. Now, I think the NDP, there's a total panic, big time panic on X from the pro-Israel kind of milieu on the NDP's position. So NDP put a statement and basically rejected it. And I don't know the ins and outs. I've seen some conflicting stuff on this with what the NDP has said about the IHRA definition previously. And I think the NDP has been a bit all over the place on this. I don't know exactly. And if anyone has more info, maybe I should have looked a little more closely before coming on. But their statement is clearly a rejection of the IHRA handbook and the panic. And I think it's quite important actually. Lots to be criticized the NDP on stuff, but the NDP has treaded very carefully on pushing back on the anti-Semitism stick. That's just they find that just to be outside of um just they never, as far as I know, they've never said that the anti-Semitism envoy is just a Holocaust promoting envoy. And I don't think they've even done any. I'm not sure if there's been any direct criticism of Deborah Lyons or Kotler for that matter before. So they've been very careful. And at the 2021 NDP convention, the IHRA pushback resolution, it had more groups assigned it than the Palestine resolution. And it didn't end up getting discussed. And the NDP worked to not deal with that. So the NDP coming out with a statement, I think, is a big step forward. It's positive. It basically is saying, effectively, it's saying you've lost that stick is just drastically lost its weight, and you cry about us being anti-Semitic, whatever, but we understand it. We're not it is intimidated by it, whatever. That to me is what the NDP statement means politically, and that's the panic, and that's why there's such a panic from the pro-Israel people on the NDP coming out on this. So that's a good development. And then two other quick things. There was a protest at L3 Harris in Toronto that apparently shut it down for a bit of time. I think it was last Monday. And then report about the gas stop factory in Ottawa, which they produce engine sensors for the F-35. And the only place, the only the in the of all the F-35 production components, all the components, this sensor for the F-35, all of them come from this gas stop. So it becomes quite important in the supply chain for the F-35. I don't know how it's a little bit the reporting on this just on Twitter. It's a little unclear. How successful this operation was. It was some sort of like a British Palestine action type operation, I think. I don't know much details. Obviously, it's very sensitive from a legal standpoint for whoever was involved. And but they apparently did sabotage this factory. I don't know how successful that was, but apparently they did. So who knows what that means for the F-35's production? But yeah, that's I'll leave it at that. And I've gone on too long, and I see Yuri. Go ahead, Yuri, and I'll try to do find Laura here. And
Actually, Eve, go to Philip first because I'm just trying to summarize some questions I want to ask.
go ahead, Philip.
So go to Philip and Joan first.
Hi. I had trouble the first 5 minutes with my audio, so I don't know if you talked about this, but Elizabeth May's letter to Jill Stein that was in the
I,
Toronto Star.
I did. I talked about it. Was it
Okay, yeah,
actually,
I'm a member of the
was
Green
it actually a
Party.
letter from her, or she was just, it was a story about her
Her,
signing that statement?
yeah. Okay, it was the one I saw was in the Toronto Star about a letter she sent or request to Jill Stein that she should drop out and endorse Kamala Harris. That's what I was talking about. But I'm a member of the Green Party, and I had to respond. I wrote to Elizabeth May and the Green Party and anybody else I could think in the Green Party and saying, well, if that's your position, if Donald Trump gets elected, I hope she will then request of the Green Party that we don't run in the upcoming federal election because, if Trump's elected, we know Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre, the conservatives, will be the first to congratulate Trump and they'll help him with his economic and foreign policy. So, if she's sincere about this, the Greens can't run in their next federal election. So, have the NDP win more seats and hopefully the Bloc will take all Quebec and we can keep a minority government in Canada so we can have some resistance to Trump's influence on Canadian politics. And the other thing about that too is where we're having this big thing about foreign interference. Well, what's she doing interfering in American politics, right? And the other weather comment was about the 41 billion more that the government's agreed in principle to put into NATO or military. Does that 41 billion have to necessarily be spent on American jet fighters and tanks and whatnot? Can we put it into housing for military families, clean up military bases, mental and physical health for veterans and their families? You know, if we're going to spend that much more money, why not do something that actually helps out the soldiers and their families instead of buying more tanks?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the NATO target has a proportion that needs to be spent on equipment. So,
Well,
so it's not just 2% of GDP. It also has to be, is it 20% on procurement or something like that? I don't forget the exact number, but there is, so they baked into the numbers is you need to buy more of this high tech equipment that, heavily is US, but also Canadian companies that are, if you look at the big shipbuilding, that's the different Canadian shipyards. They're buying a bunch of the Tomahawk missiles and stuff like that from American companies, but they're running the whole operation. But yeah, I said at the start, you missed the first part probably, but I said I was going to try to do everything I could not to talk about the U.S. election, and the only thing I would talk about was the Green Party intervention and Elizabeth May signing that. My understanding was it was I didn't read the Toronto Star. I don't have a subscription to Toronto Star. I saw the article. I saw that there's global Greens were asking Jill Stein to step down and not run, should I say, and that Elizabeth May had signed on. I didn't know that she actually like sent a letter or did something more than just signing on. But yeah, it's funny. The logic of what she's saying is not just that. The logic of it would be that the NDP and the Greens don't run, and everyone just the Liberals and the Conservatives, and I guess you could have the Bloc in Quebec. And that's the best way to avoid not having Pierre Poilievre. That's the logic of what she's saying, and it's kind of remarkable that Elizabeth May would that's like one of the biggest things she gets criticized on is, well, you're just splitting the vote and the Greens are taking away if you. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios. If the Greens just wouldn't have run a candidate, the NDP would have won, and that's happening. That kind of dynamic happens all over. So it's pretty remarkable that she would kind of wade. So, and then it's also just stupid. Like, did anyone think that was going to succeed? Like, did anyone think that Jill Stein was going to oh, I've been like running here for 6 months and I got a letter from, like what? That's stupid. But yeah, so.
Okay, so we have 3 questions. Yuri, are you ready to go now? Can you unmute, please, Yuri?
I'm going to be a gentleman and let Catherine and Joan go first.
Joan, can you please, are you there, Joan? Okay, well, we'll go to Catherine then. I don't see Joan.
I'm here.
Oh, you're okay, Joan. Can you go ahead, please?
Okay. NATO should have been abolished when the Warsaw Pact. I mean, well, you're lucky to have. I wish I was in Montreal because we should be calling for the absolute abolition of NATO. It is one of the most. I remember what happened with the originally Trump was against NATO. Do you remember that? He was against NATO because they were just sponging. That's what he was saying. They've got to increase that. He was the one behind getting it up to 2%. And imagine spending 40. I mean, this is just absolutely insane. And you're so lucky to be in Montreal to really go after them. When they came to Victoria years ago in 2007, we stopped the whole thing. And you were saying about blocking. That's what we need to block the whole conference. I mean, this is just, imagine wasting that money. It's just impossible, it's just impossible.
Yeah,
it's an insane organization.
There's almost no reaction. Like the PBO comes out with this and there's almost no reaction from anywhere. Yeah. We did the action alert to the NDP, pressing the NDP to criticize this because the NDP says they believe the NATO target is arbitrary, but in practice they just stay quiet on it.
Yeah. And I just I'm so ashamed as the former leader of the Green Party to hear what she's doing. When I was the leader of the Green Party, they would always say, why are you running? You're splitting the vote. And to go into another country and try to undermine the Green Party, just unacceptable. And I think that's, but thank you for bringing all these issues up. It's so important. But make sure that, and also the main thing, and when I heard that they were doing this conference, the counter conference, I said, go after them for having a first strike policy. They have always had it. There are only I believe there are only 2 nuclear armed countries, China and India, that do not have a first strike policy. But all the NATO countries, the nuclear countries, have a first strike policy, which is so debilitating, to the whole world.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Yuri.
Okay, but didn't Catherine want to go first?
Well, Catherine seems to have disappeared. Are you still there, Catherine? Did you?
Yeah, it's also 7:10, so if we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead, Yuri. I'm sorry, Catherine. I hope I didn't do anything. I hope you disappeared yourself. Okay, go ahead, Yuri.
All right. Well, oh, actually, there she is.
Oh,
Catherine,
okay.
go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, Catherine, can you unmute, please?
So I don't need to go first, but I guess for a time I will.
Okay.
I just my partner and I went to Halifax to the Nascat to Chubuktuk to the Nascat Al Zaitun weekend is back on Saturday. It was a 2-day thing. So the president of the college wrote a really awful letter saying that they're not keeping people safe and that's why they weren't allowed to be in the Bell Auditorium. But so they held the whole thing outside on Duke Street, downtown Halifax, and there was probably about 50 people for the whole day standing out in the cold and listening to Elle Jones give a workshop, which was fantastic. I mean, she talked about the colonial Orientalist history of the Anna Leonones, who the gallery is named after, and the Sir George Williams uprising and whole got. I mean, she just put a whole lot of fantastic, interesting stories together. And anyway, it was just I went to NASCAD, so it was really disgusted. It just made me feel so disgusted the way that the school is dealing with this. And there was I'll just say one little highlight for me, which is kind of a sad thing, but there was an Irish man there who had been to some of the encampment when the encampment was at Dalhousie, and he said, "I know I'm on the terrorism spectrum," and he said, "Now you all are." So that was kind of just was very moving how he spoke about it, how now we've been, put on that spectrum, and that when you talk about, you don't have to be called a terrorist. They just when they talk about people are not safe when you have a meeting, that's
Okay.
they've put you on that list. Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine, for sharing that. Thank you. Okay, Yuri, and we're going to be pretty quick because Eve has to go.
All right, no problem. Well, Eve, I'm curious. Which Canadian corporate or state media outlet do you think has been the worst in their coverage of Israel and why? And Murray Sinclair recently passed away. Any responses to him and any criticisms actually that you want to give about him? And also going back to all this stuff you were talking about, how fellow leftists censor you, fellow leftists bar you from speaking out on the very same things they speak out about, and all that stuff. And so I'm wondering, should leftists and other anti-imperialists, should we be lobbying more that any outlet, big or small, it could be The Breach, it could be Rabble, it could be Ricochet, it could be Briar's Patch, Candleland, Canadian Dimension, that we should demand that they republish more the TC, the Canada files, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. But should we also be lobbying more and demanding that people like Al Jones or Pamela Pomander and so forth demand that the outlets that they work with, like The Breach, invite more people like yourself, Tyler Shipley, Owen Schock, Richard Sanders, Ken Stone, Tamara, Dimitri, and so forth, and even the Maple, and even Nora Loretto. And as for the Euro Greens, it was the Euro Greens, not the Global Greens. But as for the Euro Greens and what they did with Jill Stein, I have to say this as somebody who is based in Europe and is an advocate of people to vote more Greens and not the mainstream center-left parties. I just find it absolutely disgusting that they run against their two-party systems and their three-party systems, and complain that they don't get any media coverage and stuff like that. And so how they can have the audacity to try to buck their system, but then demand that Dr. Jill Stein not buck her own unjust two-party system in which the U.S. military
Yeah,
is the
absolutely.
biggest, climate offender and is an evil empire. I just find that so disgusting. The fact that Elizabeth May would even participate in something so horrendous like that. So I just want to close by giving those Greens, those Euro Greens, this quote from Malcolm X, which is, anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep a promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to continue walking around identifying yourself with that party,
Yeah.
you are not only a chump, but a traitor to your own race. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, but yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of it. Yeah, I don't know that there's any stink here with regards to the left media. I don't really know how you navigate that. I think certainly people should have. I think it's totally legitimate to send emails to different media outlets and say, well, why aren't you having more anti-imperialist views? Is there some reason why you're concerned about something, or I don't know, right? That's totally legit. Especially if if you donate to those outlets or you promote those outlets or whatever, that seems uh legit thing to do. But yeah, I think there is, I mean, there is these outlets are not, I think there's a lot of, the people who run the outlets obviously are more attuned with the prevailing ideological climate, right? By definition, if you're going to be like the editor or rabble, you are more attuned to the prevailing ideological climate. My personal kind of I feel like there's lots and lots of, I don't know, I'm speaking on a personal level. I feel like there's lots and lots of support out there for like what I'm saying and what I, do and this and that. But there's a lot of hesitation among even the people who run the left media outlet to have anything to do with me. Some of them still, they still publish my stuff like Rabble. Generally, I had a recent instance, but that's an interesting story. They know the criticism, which has come from every different direction. Come Putin this, he's a tanky this, he's an anti-Semite this. It's all out, they people who run these outlets know that criticism. They've heard it. They're more attuned to all of it. They're more sensitive to it. They more, right? Yeah, they reflect and even I think a lot of the cases they themselves agree with they themselves even like what I'm saying, right? They're not hostile to the position, but they are concerned, like that's just kind of like the position they're in, that they have to be cognizant of kind of like what the I don't know, let's call it the left power structure, even let's call it that, their opinion again, I'm speaking about me in this case, and like the Centre Sud thing is, I think, a very clear example of that. Like it's pretty ironic that it's a left institution that would be the one that, like, oh, Eve disrupted some Liberal Party minister here, and so we don't want Eve to be around here. Whereas the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal is like whatever, right? Like, that's like that, I think that says something about kind of the how the Queens of the Hotel just doesn't, they don't even care. They don't know who, don't know I mean, maybe in a very narrow security standpoint, they pay attention next time there's a minister there, but they don't actually care about my ideological positions kind of one way or another. But yeah, so I think there's some of those kind of dynamics that are I think a little bit interesting to look at, and that but yeah, I mean, I think that to kind of bring it all back to like it's pretty bad state, and we're in a pretty bad ideological state when like the one of the 4 or 5 most left-wing MPs in the country, who represents the Green Party, is calling on the Green Party candidate amidst this Holocaust in Gaza, where both of candidates are just like $20 billion, given 20 billion in weapons, and she's calling on Jill Stein to leave, like, to not participate. Like that's kind of stunning in terms of like an ideological climate that we're operating. We're at an ideological climate where a UN special rapporteur is being shut down. I mean, like, this is crazy stuff, right? But it's normalized, but this is like, wow, like this is bad. And so, this is, it trickles, it's all over. It's trickling all over to all the different institutions of our society, obviously, including the, the left media, or a left community center that rents out spaces to left-wing groups to do, press conferences and public lectures or whatever, right? It trickles all over. So, yeah, we both live in a very free society and a wildly kind of authoritarian ideological climate. So
Okay, so Eve, I think we'll have to go now. I just want to say Albanese did speak in at McGill today,
she did, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
My understanding, from this Twitter message, is they kiboshed the room.
Yeah,
the
right.
changed a different room, and then they had to end up getting some other room. But just from a Twitter post. But yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Eve. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.